Hey guys, how's it going? And today I'm bringing you a replay from EmpressNyagato in their Yorck class cruiser, the German Tier 7. And I'm bringing it to you kind of halfway into the match because the beginning of the match wasn't all that entertaining. Nyagato went north while most of the enemy team kind of lemming trained behind them, and they just kind of balled up at the top and never went anywhere while the enemy pushed south and killed the few ships that were kind of moving that way to defend that flank of the base. And so Nyagato's kind of been towards the front, launching shots at the enemy, not getting too much damage off. But what you heard at the beginning of the match was actually the Cyclone warning going off. And to anybody who doesn't know, cyclones reduce all visible ranges that are over 8 kilometers to 8 kilometers. So battleships, cruisers, any destroyer with a large detection radius will be reduced to 8 kilometer detection. And that's actually fairly good for the German cruisers because they do have fairly good brawling armor, and they have 6 kilometer torpedoes and plenty of them. And Nyagato is going to make very good use of that, as the enemy team, as you can see, has pushed through the south and is encroaching on their base, and there's not too much back there defending it. Nyagato's team seems to be staying in the north and just bunching up, which is a bit weird at these lower tiers. Usually they kind of kill hunt at these tiers, but Nyagato's kind of making their way back to the base, sort of, kind of, not really. The enemy team hasn't made it in very large threat on the enemy, on our base I should say, but our team hasn't really gone anywhere. Like I said, they just kind of grouped up north and kind of just did circles. And right now one of our cruisers that is defending the base just said, hey, we're gonna need some help back here, as you can see in chat. And we just lost a ship somewhere, I'm not entirely sure where, but Nyagato is going to turn around and go back to help the base, because really all we have back there right now is a light cruiser, and I do believe a battleship turns around to help us. So we're gonna have one light cruiser, one heavy cruiser, and a battleship working this base over in order to defend against basically what amounts to half, if not more, of the enemy team that have pushed on the base and are trying to win just by capping, as the friendly team is just kind of sitting up here. And so the Cyclone is fully rolled in, the visual range has been reduced to 8 kilometers, and nobody can see anybody. So Nyagato's making their way back to the base. They had to go around that island. They are following this Arpeggio Kirishima as a destroyer gets nuked off to the side. And looks like the enemy team has just made it to the friendly base. So they have started capping as the friendly team has finally grown some balls and started moving towards the enemy base, leaving 3 ships to defend. So that's not the most favorable odds for defending the friendly base, but it could work out. We do have 6 torpedoes on each side of the ship. We do have an Arpeggio Kirishima, which is a pretty good ship as it is a fully upgraded Congo. And we do have another cruiser over here that I'm not entirely sure what it is yet because we haven't gotten it in range. Alright, so there's 2 enemy ships that have been spotted at our base so far, as you can see by the mini-map. And, oh, it's an Omaha, so that's not exactly the best support, especially when there are enemy battleships there. But it at least is guns. It at least shoots at the enemy ships. And there's 2 detected so far and a 3rd on the way, but I don't think that 3rd's going to make it all the way back, because it does look like he's going to be interdicted by a destroyer and possibly a battleship. And Nyagato just got detected, and it was by that Omaha that the destroyer is engaging, which alerted the enemy team to Nyagato coming. And of course that Omaha is turning out and disappearing because he did get outside of the 8-kilometer range. But we just came within visual range of one of the battleships in our base, which is a New York class, the American Tier 5. And that can do some damage, and there's actually 2 of them along with a Pensacola, the Tier 7 American heavy cruiser. Nyagato's got armor piercing loaded, fires a salvo, but the New York's going slower than Nyagato anticipated, and it was just a bow shot for 1,000. Not entirely sure why Nyagato switched to high explosive here, because that is a fairly broadside Pensacola and under 10 kilometers. The York AP is actually pretty good, but the York also has these 6-kilometer torpedoes, and that New York doesn't seem to want to turn. And like most battleships, I don't think he will. More high explosive at the New York. Lights a fire, but doesn't do any damage because it was just fired into the side armor of the battleship. And that one won't do anything either, as Nyagato finally loads armor piercing. The battleship doesn't feel like changing course and sinks to 4 torpedoes. Thank you, Mr. New York. And the other battleship, having not learned that York has torpedoes yet, has slowed down to basically a stop. Both of them have been firing high explosive for some odd reason. The Pensacola just got sank, and there goes the York's other set of 6 torpedoes. And there's a little bit of armor piercing into the side of the New York too. And there's 6 more torpedoes heading straight for a battleship that doesn't feel like moving. So, 4 more torpedoes, another kill for the York class cruiser. And that's what I wanted to kind of point out this match, because it just shows how much the storms kind of favor any kind of medium-sized vessel to small-sized vessel who has torpedoes at a decent range. So a lot of the late Russian destroyers, a lot of the basically all the German cruisers that have torpedoes, some of the early American cruisers like the Omaha and Phoenix, and of course the Russian cruisers, especially starting at tier, well, I'm not sure if the Chapayev gets 8-kilometer torpedoes. If it does, I'd say that one's pretty good for it. I mean, the 4 kilometers I'm not going to say are bad because they are fairly decent usually, but you do have to get really close to actually make them useful. But I'd definitely say the German cruisers are pretty good for this. And I kind of wanted to point this out just because Nyagato went back against basically 2 unknown battleships and a cruiser in a Cyclone to brawl against them in order to save the friendly base. And the game wasn't looking too good at the first point. The whole friendly team was up north. They had lost a couple ships. They weren't defending their base. They weren't pushing the open enemy base. And Nyagato had only done 4,000 to 7,000 damage. But after going back to the friendly base, defending it, brawling with those New Yorks, 87,000 damage? I wouldn't call that a bad result. And the friendly team actually made it to the enemy base, sunk most of the remaining ships, and is now capping. And the enemy battleship is running away from their cap as the rest of our team sweeps along the back and pushes towards the enemy base, which will be taken by capping. So fairly quick replay, but I just wanted to show that quick brawling to show don't be scared when a Cyclone rolls in. Group up with people, push the enemy fleet, and if you can catch some ships out and catch them unawares without like a destroyer escort, or if you know you're not going to get torpedoed yourself, or one shot if it's a decent sized battleship, go do it. I mean, it could change the game like you saw here. And there's the win for capping. And of course, the first the first end screen also kind of supports this claim. Even though it's only one base defense ribbon, most of that damage was just defending the friendly base. Really, the Arpeggio Kirishima was just a distraction. I'm not sure why those New Yorks were firing high explosive for the majority of the engagement, but I don't know. I mean, they weren't engaging any destroyers, they were engaging in Omaha. Maybe they were just that few New Yorks that haven't quite learned how to use armor piercing. But 87,000 damage, most of that being just from brawling and defending the base, which completely changed the game. If Nyagato hadn't done that, who knows, the enemy team could have just capped. Chased off the Kirishima, chased off the Omaha, and capped as the Cyclone finished. It's hard telling, not knowing, but it's easy to say that most of Nyagato's damage and most of the profit from this game came from going back, defending that base, and saving the game for their team. I also wanted to point out from that, Nyagato ended up second on their team overall, with the Arpeggio Kirishima right below him, and the Mahan right above them. So very good job to the enemy Mahan. I'm pretty sure the enemy, or not the enemy Mahan, the friendly Mahan, who I'm pretty sure capped the enemy base and led the charge to get the team to actually follow them and into the cap to win the game on that side of the match. And finally, I just wanted to point out that yeah, Nyagato didn't do too much with the guns. Some of that was just not picking the right ammunition type, because a lot of the high explosive was fired into the belt armor of the battleships, or a lot of the match was spent sniping because the team just didn't push, and it was kind of unfavorable to solo push in a Yorck. Especially, and sniping isn't too favorable with it either, because it has very floaty, high explosive shell arcs, and even its armor piercing at range isn't amazing. So not a lot of shell damage done this game, and not a lot of secondary damage done this game, or fires for that matter, because the shells didn't set too many. But torpedoes was where it's at, as Nyagato went back, defended the base, got 8 torpedo hits out of 18 fired. Some of those were not at the base. Only 12 of those were at the base total, but 18 torpedoes fired and 70,000 damage just from the torpedoes defending the base and keeping their team in the game in order to secure the defensive front for their team to just cap and win the game for them. So great job. I just wanted to throw this little replay out there. I'll have a larger one out pretty soon, but I just wanted to kind of show the Cyclone gameplay and give my input on what ships are good for that. And like I said, group up when you actually get into a Cyclone. The more firepower you can get on one ship as you single them out as they come into view, the better. When you focus down and just destroy one ship at a time in a Cyclone, it can absolutely devastate an enemy team. So, great job to Nyagato defending the base. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. So have a great day.